Hello, and welcome to the Student Support Services Program's Workshop Series. The following is an educational recording produced by tutors from the Student Support Services Program at the City College of New York under the supervision of sound engineer, recording engineer, mixing engineer, mastering engineer, producer, arranger, composer, Linwood Fitts. This recording accompanies a PowerPoint presentation by the same name. Please do not post or share these files, which remain the intellectual property of the Student Support Services Program. To begin, open the PowerPoint presentation, and whenever you hear a turn to the next slide.
Hey guys, this is Nashra, and I'm going to present to you today about how to tackle a lab report. Keep in mind that this is just a guideline to how to write a lab report, and it's not your lab manual itself, because I want to make sure that you do consult your lab instructor and the protocol that they gave you and your lab manual before you actually refer to this guideline, which is for writing the perfect lab report. So I would prefer that you actually refer to this presentation towards the end after you're done with your the whole writing, and to just do like the final editing. So before we begin, I ask you all to pause the audio and write down a list of contents you expect in a good lab report. Once you are done, press play to resume with the presentation. So this is just an overview of the parts we'll be going through in this presentation, which is title, the abstract, introduction, methods and materials, the key findings, the discussion, conclusion, and citations. So to begin with the title, I know we all are tempted for a catchy title because we've been taught since forever to write something that actually catches the attention of a reader. However, when you're writing a scientific report, it is a big no-no. Your title for a scientific report only states what the report is about, and it should provide a detailed understanding of what to expect from the report. And you should tend to avoid phrases like investigation on or study on, because even though you might think that's what you're doing, it's actually rather a poor statement, because it's actually taking the attention away from the reader, because they're just like, okay, we do know you are doing this investigation, you are doing this study. We don't need to know. We just want to know what is it about. And the abstract. So there are three parts that you should make sure that your abstract includes, which is the objective, the methods, and the results. The objective is when you need to make sure that you include the purpose of your experiment, the hypothesis, and or factual information on the topic. The methods is when these are quick statements on how the experiment will be conducted. Don't give the whole list of steps that you're going to be doing. Just a statement, one or two sentences has to what you're going to be doing, what is the procedure you're using. And the results, you have to say, so usually the abstract comes in the end. You write the whole lab report and you write your abstract in the end, so that you can write your observations from the experiment and findings that can be stated, and that will be for your results. And make sure that you keep your sentences concise. Don't try to write lengthy sentences, because you want to make sure that it is not too long.
I was wondering if I should include my prediction in my abstract, and if no, then why not?
So that's a really good question. So the prediction doesn't go in the abstract, however, it does go into the introduction, because prediction is part of what you're introducing to the reader. So once you've talked about all the information and the background information, everything that you need for introduction, you're going to give your prediction so that we know what you are planning to expect. And I'm going to go further on in the further slides. And I also want to make sure that you all know that if your TA does ask for an abstract, because in some cases, the lab instructor, they don't care if you have an abstract or not, and they just want you to have an introduction. In that case, you can just skip over. So for the introduction is usually a long, detailed section, and it really takes a lot of time to make this whole section complete, because it's usually from 2 to 3 paragraphs. It's really long. And it includes the reasons for conducting the experiment. It includes the hypothesis at the end of your introduction. And it also has, so you should try to make sure that it actually says why you are doing this and what is the procedure you will be doing, and you should do like a lot of research before you start writing your introduction. And once you're done with the introduction section, see if all these 4 questions are answered. So ask yourself if in your introduction you have covered as to why is this topic important? Why are you investigating on this? What previous work has been done that will be acknowledged, and what will we learn from this, and how will it be beneficial? So you should make sure your introduction covers the answers for all these. And also, just a note that in your introduction, you should justify your hypothesis. Your justification, which means the information that you get from research and etc., should not be opposite to what your hypothesis is stating. You should just find information on how to back up your hypothesis, basically. That's the purpose of the introduction. So now let's just take a break and work on giving a good title for this experiment you're going to perform and write a lab report on. So I'm going to read this out to you guys, and I want you guys to take 2 minutes for yourself, pause the video, answer it, and then resume with the audio. So give a good title for the following experiment. Plants are known to use sunlight in order to perform photosynthesis. When certain wavelengths are reflected, color is produced. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll and get this green pigment by absorbing different wavelengths from the visible light spectra. Does this mean that the rate of photosynthesis is affected by the type of light the plant is exposed to? Design an experiment to test if different light type source will affect its growth rate. Even though it's asking you to design an experiment, I just want you to give a good title for this. So the answer is that possible titles are like, you could write relationship between the light source and the rate of the plant's growth, or the effect of light source on the growth rate of plants, and so on and so forth. But it should not say something like an investigation on the light to see the light, how the light is affecting. Just get rid of the investigation and study on. Just get to the point. So the procedure, which is also known as the methodology. So make sure in your procedure you include all the materials, tools, apparatus, etc. involved. And you're never supposed to list the materials. Instead, you're supposed to write them into subsequent paragraphs. And write this section as a narrative, and try to avoid using I, me, or we, us. Try to write it in a form that if somebody is reading it and they want to actually redo your experiment, they could actually repeat the whole thing step by step without any errors. So it should be more like a narrative, like take this was taken, this was extracted, this was placed here and there, not like we took this and I did this. That makes the whole paragraph really poor. Like it makes a really weak, it's like a weak statements to just use these third languages and first language, using first and second person, And you should also make sure that you include the subjects, how many groups were formed, number of subjects, the controls, and all the variables.
Would it be all right if we put our steps in number format, or does that also have to be a paragraph?
Yes, so you have to make sure that all your paragraphs, all the steps are in paragraph form. You cannot put them in stepwise. You cannot just say, number 1, do this. Just be like, first, take this, then do this, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And also in your procedure and methods, make sure that you put any pictures of, you can add pictures of maybe the instruments you used, the tools you used, and also of the groups, like the experimental groups. You can take pictures of them and add them to it for your lab reports, because it actually gives a more good view on how attentive you are and how much you want the reader to understand what you're doing. And in some cases, the TAs really want you to give like an experimental design, which means he has you to like have all the independent, the dependent variable, the control groups, everything listed out on the table. In that case, you can also do that. So moving on to the results. This section only includes your outcomes from the experiment. Mention only factual data collected, observations, and statistical analysis. Sections may include graphs, tables, mean, standard deviation, the t-chart, etc., or any form of data. In usually biology lab classes, knowing how to do chi-square test and t-test is required. The chi-square test actually finds if there's a relationship between two sets of data, whereas the t-test determines if two sets of data are significantly different from each other. And yeah, so you should make sure that you do not do any analysis of your data in this section. All you're doing is you're just putting the numbers out, and you're just going to be like, after doing this, we got this. And when we averaged off, this was this. And you can make a T table where you write all the information, you write the values that you calculated, and just refer to your lab manual, and it gives a detailed explanation of how to write the results section.
So why do we actually need to do all of these calculations? I mean, like, how does it help with our experiment?
Yeah, that's a good question. But the reason we need to do this is because these chi-square test and t-test, these analysis actually shows how much valid or invalid your results are. It actually helps identify if what you did makes sense or not, and how significant your values are based on your observations and how much expectation is. The next slide gives you the formulas for finding the t-test, the chi-square test, and the standard deviation and all of this, and it just gives a sample overview of it. But on how to perform this, that's going to be a whole new presentation I might be doing on some other day. And if you guys have questions, you can just look it up, watch videos, and even in your lab manual, it actually gives more detailed instructions on how to actually get it. And I'm pretty sure your lab instructor is also going to go through it. And for the discussion, this is the section where you have all your analysis included. It is actually your conclusion. Make sure that you mention all the results, the values, and compare it to the expected versus the observed. So anything that you write in the discussion section, it should have in comparison. There should be a purpose of it. And I've noticed this, that some students do that. Do not restate the things that you already said in results. It's just being repetitive. Instead, if you want to restate it, make sure that you analyze it. Say why this average was higher or lower than the other average, or why you got your chi-square analysis and why was your significance really low, or something like that. Don't just mention it. Make sure that you compare and analyze the whole process and all the data that you actually collected. And present implication, explain why the results show different or similar outcomes to accept or reject your hypothesis. So you should make sure that in the end of your discussion that you are actually, by the time you're done, you actually state if your hypothesis is accepted or rejected based on your information, because that's the whole point of it. Because you started your introduction by saying, okay, so this is my hypothesis, this is my prediction, and this is why I came up with this. But then in your discussion, you should say, okay, so these were what I got for my results, and this is what this is what it says about my experiment. So make sure that you focus only on your data and speculate your study and results. Don't try to change the information, the data that you collected, because it's still your data. Make sure that you speculate your study and results, and also mention the possible errors on how the experiment can be improved. So discussion is usually a really long one. It should come up to like 1 to 2 pages. So first paragraph, you say in the discussion section, the first paragraph should say about the results, and then the next should say about your implications and how it's relative to your hypothesis, and how if your predictions were correct or wrong. And then your final paragraph can talk about the errors and what you will do in future in order to improve your experiments.
Do we need to restate our hypotheses again in the discussion section?
That's a good question. Yes, you do need to restate it before you say, Okay, so this is what happened. So if you're saying your hypothesis is that based on the wavelength, if the wavelength is more blue, the growth rate of plants decreases, and your result says the opposite, then you will have to restate your hypothesis and tell why it's not the case it is. And then try to come up with justifications as to why your data didn't support your hypothesis. And then in the end, you have to say, okay, since it did not support my hypothesis, I'm changing my hypothesis, and this is what actually happened. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. So finally, you have to have the references and citation sections. It's the list of works you cited in your report, and everything that when you are looking through stuff, when you're looking at articles, journals on the topic, and if you want to understand how the wavelengths work, how the growth rates, what are the factors that affects it, the variables, you need to go through a lot of research, and you should make sure that you actually list them all. And otherwise, it's going to be considered plagiarism, which is not a good thing, because then you get suspended and you go through all these other processes. And make sure that you alphabetize your author's last name. And there are these different, there are a lot of citation machines online, and you can just use the APA or Chicago style format and just copy and paste the links if necessary. And yes, so you should just make sure that all these sources are referred in order to avoid any problems. So do you guys have any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, guys, so that was a wrap up. I hope you guys actually benefit from this presentation and that you guys actually write the perfect lab report. Thank you.
This concludes the presentation. Thank you for listening, and we wish you all success in your studies.